Disclaimer. If you are easily triggered by people who hold a different opinion of Japanese martial arts to you, then I suggest you click away. The goal of this video is not to invalidate any martial art as a practice, assign more importance to one practice over the other, or to assume expertise in either field on my part. I'm speaking from my own informed perspective and opinion, and I very much encourage you to not only hear what I have to say, but also to look into this topic yourself and determine where you stand and why. As I say to the students I teach in my job, I'm not here telling you what to think. I am telling you to think, and to think deeply and critically. Japanese martial arts is a very broad umbrella term that refers to any martial art that has a foundational basis for its founding in Japan. This is why referring to Japanese martial arts in a video is potentially problematic, as you are referring to systems that are developed across centuries with multiple different socio-martial contexts, pedagogies, methodologies, and history of developmental change. Therefore, I will establish a contextual foundation from which I will build my statements that are, in turn, based on my own research and martial arts experience. For clarification, my martial arts experiences includes IKMF Krav Maga, amateur MMA with mates inclusive of kickboxing and judo with BJJ, and HJMA, historical Japanese martial arts. The goal of this video is to establish a context that I feel more and more people are looking into, that being the two different worlds of HJMA and Koryu or kobudo. I will do this by defining the dominant instructional and pedagogical methods used in Koryu schools today to develop a lens that can be used to differentiate the practice as it is seen today from the practice of HJMA and the practice that HJMA is endeavoring to discover. While both Koryu and HJMA deal with Japanese martial arts and history, they do so in different ways with quite different goals. And now, there are some people who move between the two and sometimes add kendo into the mix. HJMA is the Japanese variant of HJMA that, like its European counterpart, looks at historical texts and uses them to develop an interpretation of historical techniques that is to be refined through sparring and further research. In short, there is a certain pedagogical and methodological approach that differs, that makes it differ from that is taken by Koryu. Let's first analyze and elucidate the approach used in Koryu, focusing predominantly on Kata and why it uses it, specifically not only from my experience and perspective, but also from the writers in the Koryu community, such as, for example, H.B. Armstrong. Kata are the predetermined sequences of movements and concepts utilized by many Koryu systems as a method of education from teacher to student. Specifically, the purpose of kata is to transmit techniques, ideas, philosophies, movements, and various other concepts to do with martial arts as it pertains to that specific system. As elaborated in the text Koryu Bujutsu, Classical Warrior Traditions of Japan 2015, kata are, according to H.B. Armstrong, quote, partnered prearranged movement or behavior patterns, close quote, and the context through which, quote, the teacher can teach all aspects of combat, from basic movement to complexes of movement and behavior, close quotes, page 24. Therefore, it is safe to conclude that kata have, according to Koryu systems, a crucial function that teach multifaceted concepts regarding martial arts as is relevant to that relevant school or art. If we look at kata from a modern educational perspective, kata utilize a form of learning known as rote learning, which relies heavily on memorization of content, movements, concepts, and so on. By their very nature, and as defined by Armstrong, kata are predetermined or choreographed sets of movements used to summarize a variety of concepts at once as a method of transmission, which the student is then expected to practice again and again for the purpose of memorization. Rote learning, as positioned by Main in 2023, involves the memorization of specific information through repetition, close quotes. This is also echoed by the Oxford Learning Centre in 2017, when they state, quote, rote learning is the memorization of information based on repetition, close quote. Again, by the Cambridge Dictionary in 2023, by declaring, quote, the process of learning something by repetition, close quotes. It is demonstrable, therefore, that kata are a form of rote learning within the context of traditional Japanese martial arts. However, this approach seems to be quite different from the one that we are given in the historical sources from the mid-16th to the early 17th centuries. In contrast, we are told that memorization of concepts should not be the focus, and rather, by learning the basic principles from your sensei, you take these concepts and discover multiple ways of applying them for yourself, which, arguably, engenders a mindset more conducive to using the techniques against opponents in a dueling or life and death situation. Rather than establishing kata in the educative framework in its ability to teaching practical or traditional martial artists, which will be a topic of a future video, I will be comparing and contrasting it from the perspectives we are given in the historical periods we are given in eras that HJMA endeavors to look at exclusively. These sources, from which I am quoting, are from translations of texts that are written from the late 1500s to the early and mid-1600s, and the copies of which I will provide in the description of this video so you may conduct your own research. Kansuke and his successors, in fact, differentiate the memorization from the practical application in the Heiho Okukisho, translated by Thomas Cleary, page 29-30. Quote, "In the arts of war, there are differences among transmitters, practitioners, and dilettantes. First, transmitters of arts of war only memorize their teachers' instructions and become teachers and transmit them to disciples without personal application or training. Then, the practitioners are the ones who work and train on the basis of their teachers' instructions and acquire the skills to win every battle. As for dilettantes, this means people who haven't really received a teacher's instruction, but managed to develop skills and score a number of successes." Close quote. While approaches such as rote learning, as shown through Kata, in Koryu exhibits the focus of memorization over practical application, the goal of HJMA is to get as close as possible to rather acquiring practical skills defined through sparring and that are also historically based. Now, the focus of Koryu, specifically on kata and rote learning, actually makes sense, specifically when you look at it from the perspective of an environment of cultural preservation. While one may say that no form of training is perfectly representative of life or death situations, which is true, I have heard it said from others that therefore there is no point in even attempting to discover or get as close to understanding it as possible. However, in responding to this argument, Kansuke, his successors, and Miyamoto Musashi have responses as well. In fact, Kansuke says, quote, "It is precisely those who say there's no use in learning who remain foolish, even if single-minded, surviving even where they ought to die, and dying even where they ought to survive." Close quotes. Musashi, in his Earth Scroll, this is the Alexander Bennett translation, page 66. Quote, "There are naysayers in the world at large who claim that studying the way of combat strategy is futile when confronted with the reality of battle. In response to this claim, I teach that the warrior must practice his craft in such a way that it is practical and functional in all things and at all times, for this is the true way of combat strategy." We are also told that if your goal is practical application in combat, to not only use instruction from a single source, which shows a different goal to the cultural preservation usually seen in Koryu systems. Kansuke, or one of his successors, says, quote, "Although I practice this science from the age of 16 to 30, it is because of not having yet mastered military science that I use every event and everything for assistance." Musashi says in his Earth Scroll, quote, "For both generals and rank and file, it is harmful to entertain a strong preference for certain things. Having alternative plans is critical." Close quotes. Once again, in terms of practical application, the sources tell us that while your sensei provides the foundational lessons of basics, which in turn are based on practical knowledge, it is crucial to adapt these to various contexts yourself through sparring and testing yourself, and, in a way, making the techniques your own to develop others. As Kansuke says, or one of his successors says, quote, when he's discussing wrestling and boxing, "The principles of these forms, furthermore, can be adapted to all sorts of changes." Close quotes. And later, also stating, quote, "In order to illustrate the main principles, I've engaged an artist. But since the myriad changes and alternatives cannot be drawn, I've had him depict the stance as the beginning, then striking, parrying, and cutting. For those who master the principles, what variations will be beyond their function? Close quotes. Musashi in his Water Scroll says, quote, "Think of the principles as emanating from within your own heart and study hard to devise ways of embodying them at all times." Like Yagyu Munenori also states, quote, "By learning all of these techniques well and making them your own, you should develop a myriad of others." Close quote. And later states, quote, "This chapter should be taught and learned by the teacher and student through sparring. It is not enough just to detail it in writing." Close quotes. Therefore, instead of utilizing an approach that focuses on the memorization and copying of exactly what is shown by an instructor through kata, more conducive to, let's say, a cultural preservation environment, which makes sense, the context in which HJMA aimed to study suggests something very different. Rather, we are told to develop the techniques through testing them, so that we may then learn how to apply them beyond the training environment. Yagyu Munenori states, "In the martial arts, your actions will come to nothing if you have a mind that is right, but a body and limbs that are not in conformity with that mind. Though it is possible for your physical movements not to conform with the way in ordinary life, if you do not grasp the way in the martial arts, you will not become accomplished. And though you may not stray from this mind in your myriad activities, and you may be in conformity with it in your performance of the different arts, it will not translate to things beyond them." Later he states, quote, "Though they face the pages and read as skillfully as though they were annotating the ancients, they are ignorant of the truth, and so do not make the way their own." Close quotes. The part that is their own is the crucial part I'm trying to draw attention to here. Miyamoto Musashi says in his Fire Scroll, quote, "Some explain lofty theories, while others are concerned with the execution of intricate techniques. Although they exude an air of skillful beauty, they are devoid of the true spirit of strategy. The principles behind the mastery of swordsmanship and winning in combat are one in the same." Close quotes. Therefore, if rote learning through kata is not advocated in the historical context HJMA is looking at, what then is the key difference between HJMA and Koryu as two distinct practices? Koryu emphasizes cultural preservation in its practice, which is in itself a beautiful thing. It wishes to pass on a curriculum to its students and ensure its preservation through this same process, and develop an appreciation and value for it as a Japanese cultural practice. HJMA, on the other hand, focuses on a specific historical context through texts and other sources from that period, and endeavors to look at the techniques practiced in that time in the way they were practiced and understood, doing this and testing its interpretations through sparring, preferably with steel blades and protective equipment if possible. I believe understanding these different contexts and goals are crucial for two reasons. One, people are becoming more and more interested in this topic and not sure how to start. And two, and arguably the most important reason, we should learn to appreciate both practices, Koryu and HJMA, for what they offer and don't offer, do, don't do, etc. Therefore, if you are first and foremost a Koryu practitioner, you enjoy what you do and it brings you and others fulfillment, then please continue that practice while respecting others and understanding that you deal with a different context to which HJMA focuses. And vice versa, if you are like me and you focus predominantly on HJMA and you enjoy it as a practice, then continue to practice it while treating others with respect and understand that you are dealing with a different context to which Koryu focuses. Thank you mates for watching and listening to this video. I hope you found this interesting. I very much wanted to approach this mainly from the perspective, not just my own perspective, but specifically the perspective of sources written from periods where these skills and these martial techniques were used practically in duels and also in battle, which provides a very useful context to this discussion. If this content sounds intriguing to you, I do encourage that you subscribe to the channel, become a mate and join the mate community. And as always, I will see you mates in the next video. Bye-bye.